Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. In today's video, I am sharing a card with the Art Impressions mini TryFold stamp and die set. These are such a blast, and Art Impressions has tons and tons and tons of them. They're so much fun. The one I'm sharing with you today is more of an Easter stamp set. However, I could not help myself. I know it's December, but I couldn't help myself, so I had to share it. I have a piece of expressive blending card cut down to 4.5 inches by 11 inches. I'm using my score buddy, and I'm scoring this at 3 5/8 inches from each side. And then I'm going to make sure that this folds nice and neat before I start my stamping. I have the first stamp on an acrylic block here. I'm going to stamp that on there with Hero Art soft granite ink, and then I'm going to line up that die, and I'm going to run it through my die cut machine, but I'm only going to make sure that I run that front panel through there. After I have that die cut, I'm going to take a pencil here and I'm going to trace around the inside of that because I need this to help me line up my center stamp. Now I'm going to take my Inkadinkado Stamp-A-Majig. I have my images stamped on the plastic sheet here. I'm going to line this up exactly where I need it. It lines up right there centered where I have that circle traced. I'm going to put my little tool in place, ink up my stamp, and stamp it directly on there. At the moment, I'm not going to worry about erasing those pencil marks, but you do want to make sure that you do that before you start any coloring. Again, light up that die, run it through the die cutting machine, and then draw in that circle, and then I can stamp at that center one, and I'm good to go. Now that everything is folded up, you can see right down the center of this. It is so cute, and the coloring I'm going to do on this today is going to be ridiculous simple, and I'm not going to show you all of it because it is totally not necessary. It's so easy. I'm starting with my V17. I'm going to make these little tulips in purple, and I'm going where I want my darkest shaded area to be. These are kind of tiny, so it's going to feel like your marker's really fat. That is why I'm right up there on the tip of my marker, adding just a little bit to it. I'm not going to do too many of these at once. I'm just going to do a couple at a time, make sure that I'm not getting ahead of myself, making sure that I'm not making any major mistakes with these, because I really don't want to have to start this over again. And I actually had to start this over one other time, so I don't want to do that again. All right, so after I'm done with my V17, I'm coming in with my V15, and I'm just blending out that V17 and coloring in the rest of that tulip, and that is it. That is all of the Copic coloring we're going to do on these. These are so tiny. They don't require a bunch of color work on them, and I'm going to keep it just as simple with my colored pencils as well. Now, this is the first time I actually did this one, and as I started to color this in, I get to that tulip that's right up there at the top center, or left-hand center, and my V17, it kind of bleeds all over the place. So I do have to work that out with my colorless blender a little bit. And then I get done coloring these in, and then I color in the rest of the card and realize that I am no longer recording. So I had to start this over. It was a total bummer. So here we are. After I have all of my tulips colored in, I'm bringing in the B34. I'm adding this where I wanted my darkest shaded area to be on these. And again, I'm going to take this kind of slow, folks. I do have this sped up, but you can still kind of see where I'm pausing to look at where I want to add this B34. Some of these are in there so tight, it's kind of hard to see one from the other. So I'm really being really careful where I'm going to add that shading, because I don't want these to turn into a blob. I need it to keep that separation in my images here so you can actually see the greenery when I'm done with it. After I have all of my B34 done, I'm coming in with the YG17, blending out that B34, going above that just a little bit, or blending out past that just a little bit. And then I'm going to finish this off with my YG13, and I'm going to call it good. Now I am going to build up some of this grass, the greenery underneath this, because I want it to look a little bit more full. So I'm just adding flicks where the grass is already illustrated, and I extend that out just a little bit more past that, so it looks like there's a little bit more to it. Now, when I get to the inside of this card, I'm going to do the same thing on those, But I'm also going to fold it up and close it and make sure that you can't see any of that white peeking out underneath it. So as you can see here, I'm adding a little bit more of that grass, making it look a little bit more full. It extends out past the edges, but I also want it to go underneath where that circle is die cut. You don't necessarily need to do that. I just like how, again, how much more full and finished that looked. I'm not going to show you how I color in the greenery on the inside of this. I use the same exact colors and I take the same exact approach with it. They're just different shapes, folks. Otherwise, it's the same exact thing. I now am going to start coloring in my bleeding hearts here. Again, I'm going to keep the coloring really simple on this. I have an RV13 and I'll blend that out with the RV20. I'm just going in where I feel that darkest shaded area is going to be. These do get really itty bitty, so it's going to be kind of hard to get in there with that. Just do your best, folks. It doesn't have to be perfect. At the end of the day, as long as you can see the definition between each one, you're good to go. And you're going to be bringing in colored pencils, so you're going to be able to define some of those edges and some of those shapes a little bit more with those. So again, it's kind of tiny and I'm just adding a little bit to it and then I'm going to call it good. So I'm going to finish coloring this in with my R20. Now I know typically bleeding hearts are a little bit more on the reddish side as opposed to a violet side, and right now they look really pink. I am going to be adding a more color to this, and also I'm not going for realism. The nice thing about coloring in these tiny little images like this is you don't have to go for realism. As long as it's colored, the eye is going to get the idea of the shape. Now, because I know that I'm going to be using those YGs on this grassy area here, I want to do something a little bit different with the greens on these flowers. These are supposed to be pansies. I'm not going to color them in as pansies. It doesn't matter. But I do need to make sure that I have a little bit, something a little bit different going on these green. Otherwise, they're just going to blend right into my grass. So I start with the G29, blend that out with the G24, and then finish that off with a YG21. It does still give it a little bit of a yellow-green cast. That's fine. You're still going to be able to tell the difference between that grass there and the leaves, and that is all that's important. Instead of coloring these in as pansies, which pansies actually have a good deal amount of detail, can't think, can't talk. They do have a good amount of detail. I'm actually going to skip that and just color these as a white. So I'm starting with the BV23. I'm going right down there in the centers. I had colored those centers in with yellow Staedtler pens. I do have a full length, a more detailed video over on my Patreon if you're interested in checking that out. And I do talk more about these flowers and how I colored them in. So definitely go check that out. Once I'm done with that BV23, I'm going in with a BV20, and then I'm going to finish these off with a B60 and kind of push some of that back a little bit afterwards with the colorless blender, and I'm going to call it good. Again, they're so tiny, you can't even tell the detail in them, folks. You just need to see white. That's all you need to see. White and shadow. That's it. I colored the grass and the little dandelion puffs the same way I did on the center of that card with those white flowers and the grass. So I'm just going to show you the little bunny here. I am coloring him in brown, and I all of a sudden cannot remember exactly what colors I used to color this guy in, but I will have them linked down below if you're interested in that. Again, he is so small, he doesn't take a whole lot. I knew that I wanted him to be brown, so I brought in a darker brown for my darkest shaded areas. I'm then bringing in a mid-tone brown to blend that out. I wanted his little ear to stick out just a wee bit, so I did come in with a tiny bit of R22, blended that out with an R20, and then I can finish coloring this guy in with my browns. I need to bring in that shaded area a little bit around his rump here on his back where he would have some shadow from his little head. On the left hand side of his face is also going to be shaded because that's the furthest away from us. So I'm blending that out with my mid-tone brown, and then I'm going to finish this off with another lighter brown. But as I'm coloring this in, I realize I really need to have a fairly good highlight there on his body right there, and then on his face as well. Need to make sure that that sticks out pretty good, and then I'm going to call it good with that guy. I did use a dark gray Staedtler pen to color in his eyes and his little nose, so those would stand out as well. After I'm done with all of my Copic coloring, now I can bring in my colored pencils. I am going to use Prismacolor on all of this. I am starting with the Prismacolor in dark purple. I'm going in where I had that V17 and with a super duper light hand, just adding a little bit more depth there, kind of cleaning up some of those lines and making these flowers look a little bit more crisp around the edges. I am not going up where I had any of that V15. I don't want that to be dark because I do want to have just a wee bit of shape to these. Plus, I'm also going to warm them up a little bit with the Prismacolor Mulberry pencil. So I don't need to bring in all of that dark purple. Again, I'm not going to show you how I do all of these, folks. It is the same thing for all of these tulips. And at the end of the day, it really didn't take me a long time to do this card, which is probably good since I had to do it twice. So it didn't really take a lot because it's so tiny. You don't need a whole bunch. So here's where I was talking about how I'm going to warm these up a little bit. You can see instantly how that changes. I am bringing that mulberry over the top of that dark purple, and I'm going up into some of that V15, but not all of it. I am making sure that I leave some of that V15 to shine through. I do end up bringing in a Pablo white pencil in some of those sharper edges there where one petal will overlap over the top of another petal. I kind of added that Pablo right on the edge there to kind of help sharpen that up a little bit more, and it kind of makes that the ridge of that petal pop out towards you just a wee bit more. So for all of my greenery on all three panels, I'm bringing in the indigo blue. I'm going right over the top of where I had that B34 again. I'm also using this to clean up those edges and add that definition and add some of that shape. It not only pushes it back, but it gives the eye some more definition on what these shapes are supposed to look like. It is so hard to get into the tiny little images with Copics, and it's doable, but sometimes what ends up happening is it looks really messy. Now, if you have too much of a mess, there is no colored pencil on the planet that's going to fix that. However, if you can manage to keep it to a minimum, you can clean that up with your colored pencils, and it's awesome. Once I was done with all of the indigo blue, I'm bringing in the Prismacolor in Prussian green. I'm going over the top of that indigo blue, and we're bringing that out just a little bit where I had that YG17. I do have quite a bit of that green Copic showing through, and that is great. That's what I want. I don't want to color all of that up, except on these little leaves down here. They are so tiny, it would be hard not to cover them all up. But also I'm making a point to cover them all up with the spring green, because again, I need that contrast between the leaves and the grass. On these white flowers here, I'm bringing in the Prismacolor in Periwinkle. I'm going into those darkest shaded areas, and also I color in the center of those bleeding hearts with the same color combination. Those are so itty bitty, it's going to be really hard to get a Copic in there, but you totally can. If you don't want to, then skip the Copic and just go in with your colored pencil. You're still going to get that shade in there. On these bleeding hearts, I'm coming in with the Prismacolor in dark purple again. I'm going in where I had the RV13 and bringing that out. Now I'm coming in with the Prismacolor in crimson red, going over the top of that dark purple and blending that out, and then that is good to go. I do the same thing on the dandelion puffs and the grass that I had done on everything else on the rest of the card, so I'm not going to show you that. But here is where I'm coloring in my little bunny, and again, I don't know what it is with the browns, but I can't remember them. I will have them linked down below if you're interested in those, folks. I just went in with a darker brown pencil, went in where I had my darkest brown Copic, and then I'm just going to blend this out with a lighter brown pencil. I'm not going to go over the top of everything that I had already colored. It's not necessary. I'm just adding a little bit more depth, cleaning up up those edges, and then I'm going to call it good. Now, I know that you can see the Copic coloring on the inside of this, folks, and if you wanted, you could create panels for the inside of those to cover them up. I'm totally not going to worry about it because I think that it is just fine, and it is so darling. I actually cannot wait to do more of these. And again, I know that this is an Easter card and we're in December, but when I saw this, I had to have it. It is so cute. I can't even stand it. And that is it, folks. We are done. We are good to go. Again, I have more details and links down in the description below, as well as over on my blog. I have the full real-time video available on Patreon, so do consider becoming my patron. They're so totally worth watching. I have loads of more details. I hope you enjoyed my card today. If you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all future notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.